Hello, everybody, and welcome to the DenziBlitz here on the ECS Network. I'm Mike from Electric City Sentai DenziCaster, and I am super excited this week because this week we have ourselves a brand new series. We are starting Uchuu Keiji Gavan, or if you prefer, Space Sheriff Gavan, unless you're in the Philippines, in which case it would have been Sky Ranger Gavan. Regardless of what you call it, or if you're in France, it was Exor. But regardless, Gavan, Space Sheriff Gavan, the very first of the Metal Heroes shows and the oldest show we have yet watched here on the DenziBlitz. It debuted in 1982. Your humble host here was not even yet 1 year old when Gavan first hit the airwaves. So, real quick, if you haven't seen enough, just a short bit of housekeeping, if you haven't gotten enough quite yet of your Tokusou Sentai Deca Ranger, because we wrapped that up last week, hey, go become one of our patrons. Jump over to patreon.com/ECS Network, sign up to be one of our patrons, because just last week we put up a special DenziBlitz episode just for our patrons. That was us talking about Girls in Trouble Space Squad Episode 0, which is sort of the prelude to the Deca Ranger Space Sheriff Gavan movie that aired earlier this year. It came out in Japan earlier this year. So go check that out. Become one of our patrons. Help support all the shows here on the ECS Network, not just DenziCaster and DenziBlitz, but all the great shows. And get to see some cool special episodes that won't air anywhere else. We've got another episode planned for next month. We're keeping that under wraps right now, but get a chance, go check it out. Go become one of our patrons. We greatly appreciate it. We need better lighting, so because we're actually putting together the DenziCaster set here at my humble abode, which I'm very excited about, and you'll see more of in the coming weeks on social media and whatnot. But today, Space Sheriff Gavan. Of course, since it's the first episode we're talking about the series, we're going to take a little bit longer than a normal episode of DenziBlitz. So what is Space Sheriff Gavan? Space Sheriff Gavan is the first Metal Heroes show. Now, a slight bit of history here. Metal Heroes as a franchise started in 1982, although I doubt they realized that it was a franchise when they started. I don't think any of these shows start with the intent of creating a franchise. But it is essentially the third of the major Toei hero franchises. Toei superhero shows are generally broken down into approximately 5 categories. Kamen Rider is largely considered the first major franchise. It starts in 1971. Super Sentai starts in 1975. And then Metal Heroes starts in 1982. Also in there is the Fushigi comedy series, which has some magical girl stuff and some hero stuff. And you have what is generally collectively called the Ishinomori Heroes, which is Kakaida 01, Newsman and Newsman Flash, and Zubat. And you can kind of throw in the first 2 seasons of Super Sentai, Go Ranger and Jacker, and Kamen Rider into that mix, because Ishinomori had a hand in all of those as well. But usually those are excluded because they're their own franchises. In 1981, Kamen Rider Super 1 was on the air, and the decision was made, for whatever reason, to not come in with another Kamen Rider series the following year, in 1982. Not unlike Super Sentai, where in 1978 there was no Super Sentai show. Instead, we got Toei's Spider-Man. So the Space Sheriffs were the beginning of the Metal Hero franchise. There were 3 shows, one after another. Space Sheriff Gavan, Charivan, and Shider. And the franchise has gotten the name Metal Hero, and it is the term coined over the years, largely because of the look, whereas the Kamen Riders were, had more of motorcycle-looking gear, with sort of this padded armor, leather look in places, that kind of deal. And Super Sentai was more of a skin-tight suit, although the early days it wasn't really spandex, but you get the general idea. The Metal Heroes were armored, and it was supposed to evoke this look of futuristic metal armor. Gavan certainly went for that look all out because he's supposed to be shiny, bright silver chrome, and if you see the newer stuff, that's certainly exactly what he looks like. In this series, not entirely so much. It's sometimes more of a flat gray, but that's because Gavan likes to get down and dirty when he's beating up the bad guys, the evil Maku. So the series stars the legendary Kenji Oba as Retsu Ichijoji, Space Sheriff Gavan. Kenji Oba started in Tokusatsu as a stuntman, and you can see it in everything he's ever done in Toku. You can see that most definitely. He begins life as a stuntman all the way back on Go Ranger. Moving forward in his career, he finally gets a shot in front of the camera with Battle Fever J, playing Battle Kenya, and then, which was the third Super Sentai show, and then in DenziManny's DenziBlitz, and then here he gets his first shot as a leading man, as Gavan, the first hero in a brand new franchise. Wakiko Kano plays Mimi, which is his sidekick slash assistant slash deputy. They never really give a term for what she is, but every Space Sheriff has a female sidekick, and you will find this is a very common thing throughout a lot of the Metal Hero shows, especially the early ones. And as a concept, you can even take that back further to Kamen Rider Stronger, because Kamen Rider Stronger has Tackle, which is another superhero sidekick, because these characters typically have some sort of power in and of themselves. And while there is, of course, an extensive cast list, I just want to touch on two others that are fairly important in our early episodes, and that is Michiro Aida as Hunter Killer, and Shozo Iizuka as Don Hara, the big bad guy of the Maku Empire. So, Space Sheriff Gavan, which has been immensely popular around the world now for 3+ decades. It was a huge deal in France, the Philippines, Brazil. Never quite hit the U.S. The closest we ever got to the Metal Heroes were VR Troopers and Big Bad Beetleborgs, which were both based on Metal Hero shows. And the closest we got to one of the Space Sheriffs would have been Ryan Steele's Armor in the second season of VR Troopers, which is a reuse of Space Sheriff Scheider. Just want to make sure I get the names right. So the broad concept, the high-level idea of Space Sheriff Gavan is when the criminal space syndicate known as the Maku, led by Don Hara, invade the Earth. They destroy a space colony that is near Earth. The idea of the Maku is they want to rule the galaxy, but Earth represents this hurdle that they have to overcome. And he wants to do this by essentially turning it into, to steal a phrase from another sci-fi product of the time, a hive of scum and villainy. But the Galactic Union Police, which is the sanctioning governing body for the Space Sheriff program, sends Gavan to Earth to defend the planet, in part because it was his mother's homeworld. That's one of the reasons he's very protective of it. His father was from another planet, but his mother is from Earth, and he wants to protect her home. The daughter of the Galactic Union Police Commander Quom, is Mimi, and she is his deputy or assistant. Usually is fed various information by the commander, acts sort of as a liaison. And while Gavan is on Earth to defend against Don Horror and his evil minions and machinations, he adopts this incognito identity as Retsu Ichijoji, which was his mother's maiden name, and joins the Avalon Youth Club, as his day job in Japan, basically as a cover for him to track down the evil Maku. So that is sort of your high-level concept of the whole thing. There's a lot of tropes that you're going to see in this show. The first episode of Space Sheriff Gavan, and we're talking about episodes 1 through 6 today. Episode 1 is called The Strange Fortress Beneath Tokyo, which is essentially your pilot setting up everything for Gavan to come to Earth, for what the Maku are, setting up some of the various tropes that we're going to see throughout the series. One of the most famous tropes of Space Sheriffs Forever and Ever Amen has been the fact that their armor can be deposited upon them in 0.55 milliseconds or something like that. So fast that we need to see that again in slow motion. And they'll do an instant replay of the transformation sequence, which is sort of an interesting way to explain doing stock footage. Because when you see him transform normally, it's never stock footage. But they'll cut to the stock footage so that you can see exactly how it happened. In the early episodes, the first 4 or 5 episodes, them doing that doesn't really make much sense because you see him do all the motions just like he would, period. Same stuff he does in slow motion. But there's one episode where it really is. A bullet is fired and he's transformed before the bullet hits him and he's able to catch it. And in that situation, it actually made sense because you never see him move. And that's when you get the idea of, oh wait, he can move that quickly to transform. The second big idea that you get out of this is called Maku space. So a phrase you are going to hear me say repeatedly as we talk about this show, and a phrase you've probably heard if you've watched DenziCaster for any period of time, is cat drugs. This is the show that coined that phrase for Toku fans forever. Basically, Maku space, which is explained in the show as sort of a manipulation of a black hole by Don Horror, is this strange area of time and space where the Maku monsters, which are called BIM monsters in this, BIM is an age-old sci-fi term for bug-eyed monster. The BIM monsters are 3 times stronger in Maku space, and oftentimes strange, weird, unusual things will happen. Skies take on weird colors. You'll see various different, just off-the-wall sort of things happen in Maku space. And so you will see this trope repeatedly throughout the Space Sheriff franchise. Every evil space mafia seems to have some version of it. But it's the equivalent in Gavan of calling the giant robot in Super Sentai. Usually he will fight the monster, start to get the upper hand. Don Horror will say, draw them into Maku space. And Gavan will call on his really cool motorcycle, the Siberian, and ride into Maku space, fight the bad guy again, and eventually dispatch him, and it will be the explosion of the bad guy that ruptures Maku space and allows him to escape. Don Horror himself is a throwback of sorts. Wasn't a throwback at the time, but if you look at it now, it's a very retro thing in tokusatsu of what I affectionately call the Blue Light Special, which is I say that after the Great Leader from Kamen Rider. He is essentially a statue and a light on a wall. You do not see him in a physical form, at least not in the first 6 episodes. It's a voice and little more. There are some armholes, and you see arms moving and waving about and making gestures, but beyond that, he's a statue stuck on a wall. But it creates this really interesting thing in tokusatsu that has been attempted a couple of times since, and I don't think well. Ghost Sager is actually an example of it, where you have multiple villain commanders throughout the course of the show. Kamen Rider did it extremely well, where you would have a leader or a general show up, he does his thing, he gets waxed, we move on. Bring in the next general. We need another Timmy. So, the big bad is usually a statue or a light on a wall and a voice who tells these monsters, go do my bidding. You might get cut in half by Gavan and his laser sword, but you will get destroyed by me if you don't try. And it lends credence to how big and bad the bad guy is when you stop to think he's willing to face possible death because he knows if he doesn't, it's certain doom. So how big and bad does the bad guy have to be that these monsters will take a chance on probably dying over having to face the big bad? It gives gravitas without the big bad guy having to act. It's a very interesting storytelling device that most people wouldn't go for these days, I don't think, but it does work if you go back and you watch some of these older shows. Like I said, Strange Fortress, the Strange Fortress Beneath Tokyo is essentially the setup. The second episode is called The Stolen Japanese Islands, and I'm just going to kind of blast through the plots of these because here's another thing about Gavan. From the 6 episodes I've watched, there is not really an overarching meta plot. A lot of old Toku shows were very, very episodic, but there are pieces in these episodes that give you hints of overarching plot threads, not necessarily a full story arc yet. So in The Stolen Japanese Islands, the Maku steal a bunch of oil tankers and demand a crap ton of diamonds. The idea is they're going to drop these oil tankers on various cities and blow them up and set the cities on fire. Until, of course, Gavan intervenes. The third episode, which is called Oh No! Stop Dr. Kuriboshi's BIM Project. That's another thing about the old shows. The titles could get long and interesting. And if you are someone who does not like spoilers, never check out the episode titles of these shows. But basically, a mysterious man with some strange powers steals a goat in the woods. Gavan investigates. You can't make this stuff up, folks. And basically figures out that it's this weird plot from the Maku, which leads to also the kidnapping of several small children, and who are being tested on because, as Don Horror says, try it on children, they're more resilient. And it is also in this episode that we get one of the first mentions of Space Sheriff Voicer, who was Gavan's father, and who was previously assigned to Earth, and his ultimate fate. And then episode 4 is called The Demon Helmet That Calls for Death. Basically, the Maku send their evil minions after a professor who is searching for this ancient relic, this demon helm that basically makes the wearer completely invulnerable and immortal as long as he wears it. The Maku want it for their own devices, but Gavan is going to try to find it first to make sure it doesn't fall into evil hands. Episode 5, Mimi Cries, the deadly poison cobra bullet hits Retsu. Talk about a mouthful. Basically, Gavan gets shot. And by Hunter Killer, who we have discovered by this point, as if the name wasn't a dead giveaway, is an expert marksman. And the whole story is basically, is Gavan going to survive getting shot with this bullet, which is going to poison him slowly but surely. And then perhaps the most interesting episode out of the first batch, and this was the episode that aired right before my birthday, actually. It's called The Geniuses of the Maku School, and essentially, the Maku have figured out that if you feed octopus food to children, that they will turn into double men, which are this specific type of Maku monster that can disguise itself as anyone, can basically become a duplicate of another person. So the question is, of course, can Gavan stop the evil plot before the Maku have used enough octopus food to turn all the children of Japan into up-and-coming double men? So, that's your overarching plot for the first several episodes. First 6. So, my thoughts after looking at these first 6 episodes. Number 1, the action's tremendous. I really, really, really do love Kenji Oba in this type of role, and now it's just him. The spotlight is all on him. He's getting to shine. Not to say that he didn't look good in the Super Sentai shows, but typically speaking, in Super Sentai, if you're not the Red Ranger, if you're not the guy in red, you don't get the bulk of the action, the bulk of the focus. It just doesn't happen. And it is an ensemble cast in those situations. Here, it's Gavan. He is the hero. So you get a lot of focus on him. I enjoy the supporting cast. I'm not sure what I think about the whole idea of the Avalon Youth Club is basically a stable. There's a soccer team, and a lot of times it's Gavan either brushing horses, cleaning horses, or mucking out stalls. There is this professor that we see a good bit of the time with Gavan and company, who is obsessed with aliens, and he's playing a bit of an unwitting resource type role to Gavan. Mimi is interesting, but they haven't given her a lot to do yet. So I'm very curious as to whether or not she is going to be the atypical female sidekick in a Toku show for this time frame, which means they're never going to give her a lot to do, or if she's actually going to get some episodes where it's really a focus to her periodically. That's not something you have to do all the time, nor do I think they should do all the time, but it'll be interesting if they flesh her out a little bit as far as the backstory is concerned. Don Horror, I'm a little ambivalent about. Like I said, he's the Blue Light Special. He's the voice coming out of a statue on the wall. Hunter Killer is far more interesting to me at the moment because they've given him a backstory from Jump Street. He is a renegade space sheriff. He was one of them at one point in time. He was one of the good guys until he turned his back on everything they stand for and went to work for the Maku. And they give you some indication that he might be the person responsible for Space Sheriff Voicer, Gavan's father's, disappearance. Gavan, I didn't really quite catch whether or not the implication is that Voicer disappeared or he's dead. However, and I've seen Voicer in the credits, or not the credit, but the cast list for the show. I'm not going to say who plays him yet because it's pretty cool who does. Not often you get an actual name in one of these shows, but we do here. But with Voicer, I don't know if that's a flashback or he actually shows up. I haven't seen this show before. So I'm really interested to see how this works out, how this pans out. Because one of the things that we get is Hunter Killer, to mess with Gavan in the heat of battle, tells him your father is rotting in hell. At one point, he said, "No, your father's dead." They actually tells him your father is your father awaits you in hell, which implies, of course, that he's dead. But the high command, so to speak, the Galactic Union, his commander well, but we never found a body. So we can't tell you beyond a shadow of a doubt he's dead because we never found a body. He could still be alive. And so it creates this sense of question and some hope of, did Voicer go to ground, or is he really dead? And that is a story that they're going to have to develop with Gavan as we go on. And Gavan and Hunter Killer as this arch nemesis, arch rival connection, which is very common to old tokusatsu shows, that the hero has a nemesis, not just the big bad, but they also have an arch rival. That seems to be what they're setting Hunter Killer up as. So I'm very, very curious to see that. If you watch, well, we're watching Live Man over on DenziCaster right now. Each of the 3 live men has their counterpart among Volt. So that exists there. Kamen Rider did that with virtually every general in the original series. It would be the general versus Kamen Rider as your rival relationship. The great leader is the ultimate big bad. So here right now it's Hunter Killer is that rival, while Don Horror is the ultimate big bad. I'm really looking forward to it. Some of the trappings of the show, for a tokusatsu show made in 1982, it looks tremendous. I don't know if that's just the Blu-ray transfers that I'm watching, or if it's just the show looked really looked that good, because it really looks like it looks that good. The music is gloriously early 80s, late 70s. Although I'm pretty sure I heard the Charlie Angels theme at least once as background music, as just interstitial Gavan sneaking around music. I'm fairly certain that it was the Charlie Angels theme. So there's that. The only thing that really hasn't aged well, and we'll see if it gets more or less annoying to me as we go on, are the multiple replays of certain actions. A very common trope back in the early days of tokusatsu would be to, or even a lot of Asian cinema in general, because I've seen it in other Asian films, would be replaying the same action beat, boom, 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 from different angles. So let's say Gavan goes to punch the bad guy. Well, you might see the punch from this side, and then you'll see the punch from this side, and then you'll see the punch from over Gavan's shoulder, and then you'll see it from over the monster's shoulder, and you get the idea, right? And they'll just show it over and over and over again, all the way down to some of the poses and whatnot. That hasn't aged well, and so I'm not sure how I'm going to feel about that as the show goes on. Like I said, will it just be something that I get used to? Or am I going to sit there and go, gee, here we go again? Time will tell. So regardless, I'm in. We're here for the long haul. We got, I want to say 8 episodes. This is an 8-part series as we look at Gavan. Let's see here. Yep, we're watching this until the first week of September, folks. So next week it will be episodes 7 through 12 that we are watching. So for those of you following at home, playing the home game, that's going to be A Monster Hides, A Girl Kissed a Petal. That's episode 7. Good or Evil, The Silver-Masked Great Hero. That's episode 8. The Beautiful Puppet Spy is episode 9. Episode 10 is Crush the Human Crusher Core. Episode 11 is Father Alive? Ooh. Is Father Alive? The Mysterious SOS Signal. And episode 12 is Go to the Amusement Park, UFO Boy's Big Pinch. So, yeah, we've got a lot to go here, folks, and I am seriously looking forward to it. So, I hope you've enjoyed this first look, this first discussion on Space Sheriff Gavan. There will be more to come. Most of the rest of them won't be this long, of course, because we're talking about a lot of the first blush stuff, and I even left stuff out. I left out his mecha, Dole, which doubles as a spaceship. We'll bring that up in a later episode. I've left out some of his signature stuff, like the laser blade, things like that, aka a blatant ripoff of a lightsaber from Star Wars. But these are all things that we'll bring up as we go through some of these episodes. I just want to introduce some of the high concepts today, and get a lot of that out of the way early on, because these are things that actually warrant explanation up front, rather than some of the minutiae of what I think of certain elements of the show. So, we've got 7 more weeks of Gavan to come. Go over to our Patreon, patreon.com/ECS Network, and become one of our patrons, especially if you want to see some exclusive episodes of DenziBlitz that won't be anywhere else. Like I said, the one that's up over there for this month is Girls in Trouble Space Squad Episode 0. Next month, we will be doing Gavan versus... it's going to be Deca Ranger versus Gavan will be the one we do next month. And then I want to say for September, we're going to wind up doing Go Keiji versus Gavan, so that we do 3 Gavan ones back to back to back to go all coincide with what we have here. If you want to know what we thought of the Gavan movie, check out a couple of weeks ago, I think, on DenziCaster. Andrew and I took a look at that with the current Space Sheriff Gavan, because the one we have right now is number 2. Although... I guarantee you there's going to be some cool Kenji action in that movie if you go check it out. But we discussed that over on DenziCaster. Right now on DenziCaster, it's all about Live Man, although you'll find some Pretty Guardian Sailor Moon, and you will find some Garo, the One Who Shines in Darkness, scattered in throughout that, so check that out. And, of course, please go over to our Cafe Press page, cafepress.com/ECS Network. It's another great way to support us here, and help us get some new lighting, get the set up for DenziCaster. I believe that they're working on a set for 8-Star Anime as well, so we can certainly give them a hand there too. And whatever happens at your local Chopsaki house over on Chopsaki Cinema, I'm sure they can. I know they could use the lighting kit. Me and Will have talked about that. So go over to Cafe Press, check out our Patreon, and of course check us out on all the various social media places that will pop up after I'm done talking. So, until next time, folks, when we have more of Uchuu Keiji Gavan, I'm your host, Mike, and we'll see you around.